Hello and welcome back to another episode of House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 2, Rhaenyra the Cruel, written by Sarah Hess, directed by Claire Kilner. I had moments that I enjoyed in this episode, and I had moments that still make me question the decisions being made in regards to some of the character exploration. But for the most part, at least, I got more of the emotional fallout and focus on that with Ageon, Rhaenyra, the complaints I had in episode 1. There was more of a massage of that. I still contend I would have preferred them splitting that up between these two episodes, but that's neither here nor there. I did need to clarify a few things from episode 1 podcast. The first being, I know I keep blaming everything on Rondell, but I also am fully aware that HBO has a way of putting its tentacles in shows. There are things going on behind the scenes that a showrunner may not have any control over, and something we'll discuss a little bit more in the feedback episode, which will be coming tomorrow, is that there were a lot of things that kind of not within their control as far as how many episodes the season was going to have, which is something I was not personally aware of. Another tidbit is a friend of mine reached out and said, well, I actually like you might actually like the official podcast this year because I like the first and second episode. I will eventually get around to listening to the podcast. I love Bald Move podcasts, even though we disagree sometimes. I still love their podcasts. I love TV Podcast Industries podcasts. There are a few others like Pete Peppers. I love Pete. Honestly, his voice could do so many things to me, but I digress. The point of it is, when I said I was going to be watching the show in a bubble, for the most part, I meant I'm not going to be jumping into any comment sections and trying to really catch up with what everyone is saying about every episode after the episode, with the exception of probably Pete Peppers, because he has a very concise way of doing his recaps with some of his commentary, that it's the only one I know I can watch without it too much influencing my own take. So that's what I meant when I said I was going to watch the show in a bubble, not so much as that I'm not going to know anything that's going on behind the scenes, because clearly I'm going to do that for the podcast. But other than learning those things behind the scenes, I'm not going to be like out there defending every point like I would on some other podcasts that I do, even though I'm still working on trying not to do that when it's shows that I know I'm not going to get anything conducive from said audience. Another quick point from last episode is that I discussed the role of women throughout history, or throughout the historic record, without notating that there are exceptions to the rule that valued and offered rights to women to certain degrees above, say, Victoria times, European standards, and shocker of all shockers, there were matriarchal societies in Africa. Egyptian women had equal rights to men. Even their gods were equal. Going back even further, I always say this wrong, Etruscans, Celtic women had rights, Spartan women had rights. It also feels as if the higher you were in society, the role you played, the more restrictive your agency as a woman was within that society, because the men did not want to disperse power outside of their hands. So I felt as if bringing up one side wasn't fair, that I should also notate that it wasn't just the standard all across every continent. And lastly, because I had a long conversation with one of my college professor friends who is an English major, and we know due to my long ass rant last podcast that I have a huge issue. It's a pet peeve of mine, always has been a pet peeve of mine when I feel as if a word is not being used correctly. However, he pointed out to me, and he had a good point, to which I acknowledge, is that the actions of the person in the current moment would be apocryphal. But on the other flip side of that, he agrees you can't just call someone a hypocrite just because they do something that's apocryphal, because how I interpret being called a hypocrite means it's a pattern of behavior that is extensive and very much, like I said, intentional. There's more of a conscious awareness. Like, for example, in this episode, Criston Cole is the epitome of a hypocrite. He has no accountability for his own actions. Whereas, and I don't even think I was really defending Criston Cole. He feels like a character that is very indifferent to me through most of his actions. I know who he is. I know what he is. And I'm not too thrown by the responses I get from him on screen. And for the most part, I don't even get angry about it because that's just who he was. That's how he always was. And I'm not emotionally invested. Alicent, on the other hand, I am emotionally invested. I do track a lot of what her storyline is playing out with, and I do have issues with that this episode, but I would not qualify her as a hypocrite, but I agree her current actions are hypocritical, if that makes sense. Moving on from the leftovers from last episode, let's discuss this episode, starting with Hugh for Small Folk President. They have not given Hugh a last name, but there is a character from the books called Hugh Hammer. I won't spoil anything about this character, but I do appreciate the fact they're not bringing him in just as what he was known for, but they are starting from the ground up with his storyline, which is, I am one of the small folk. I'm going to be feeling the effects most from the war that is very much unfolding right now. We know that there's a blockade in place. So that means that the goods and food that people need where they are in King's Landing are not getting to them. He has a sick daughter, it would appear. He's already been seen asking about the relief of taxation. Although Aegon wants to be able to help the small folk in this capacity, Otto is the one that dissuades him about why they need the taxation. Aegon takes decisive action by choosing to not only go after the rat catcher that assisted, because they don't know anything about cheese, but to kill all of the rat catchers until he gets his man, which turns the sentiment against his regime, although Otto had a plan in motion to make sure the small folk were in their sympathies and against Rhaenyra, but due to his own actions, he contradicted that goodwill. And he was a very direct person we can look to that's going to epitomize their struggle. And it was very clear this episode just how removed from the people those that are in power are. Like Helena. I think Alicent had a little bit more of an understanding. But Rhaenyra is going to have the same issue. That these people are going to have a say in who actually is going to govern them. They're not just nobody. As long as things are happening in their favor, all good. But the minute that things are not, they have far more agency. And I'm glad they're introducing that part, because historically we know that peasants did revolt and it didn't always end well.
We lost that round, but it's not over yet. You get ready for the next one.
That's not to say that eventually we have this thing called democracy that clearly highlights that it was a continuous struggle that eventually the small folk did find some power in. And I think it's going to be really, really fascinating to see how Hugh's storyline unfolds, knowing where it goes, and having him be at the position that he is with an allegiance to pretty much the status quo versus someone who is making a claim for the very same throne. And I can't say much more about that because I feel like I'm going into spoiler territory. So let's move on to another small perspective, Jacaerys and Baela. Baela is tasked with watching over King's Landing, while Jacaerys is put back in the corner to be kept safe.
Oh, put me in cold. I'm ready to play today.
As a mother, Riri's actions are understandable, but Jacaerys is a male who is not only looking to prove himself, but has a legitimate reason to particularly want to be involved in this war. And I'm wondering how long she can maternally keep him under her wing before he decides he finds his own anger, if you will. Even though it doesn't feel as if it's going to erupt as their scene unfolds, because Baela, practicing with her crossbow, says that she fears her own father because he absolutely and utterly ignores her. That scene where they were passing each other in the hallway.
Stranger.
Still don't know nothing.
I do wonder what saving grace they want to give Daemon. That of a father, or that of someone who's humbled by his own sense of, what's the word I'm looking for when you think you're better than anybody else due to your blood? His own ingrained nepotism? Because they're definitely making it clear that not only does Baela not have a relationship with her father, but she doesn't even see him as someone worth having a close bond to, because he's just the way he is. Where Jacaerys has a moment where he gets to open up about his own father, and she doesn't even pretend to not know who that is, because let's be real, the whole entire realm knows. This is something that seems to be forgotten. And I understand from a personal perspective, you can fuck who you want to fuck, have kids with who you want to have. Your husband's cool with it. That's your personal business. But if you are trying to wear that crown, then you cannot just go running around with these bastards, as lovely and as beloved as they are, as if that's not a problem with everyone. You know, that kind of knocked you out of, I mean, that was the biggest issue that pushed you out of the contendency, because it wasn't just that, you know, a woman's going to be on the throne. That was big enough. But now the heir to your throne is bastardization blood. And I'm not sure Riri ever thought that far ahead into her future to realize, her children will always have that stigmatization, and it's going to be a problem for them. But I did love that Jacaerys was able to express his love for his actual father, whose name is Strong. I know that's his last name. Right now, his first name is really missing me. But he's like, I think he loved us. And she's like, of course he loved you. It was very clear that they had a loving relationship, and those children were made out of love. So not only has Riri had one incredibly flexible marriage, her initial romance with Kristen Cole, her second beautiful romance with Harwin, I think that's his first name, Harwin Strong. And then she gets to have her dream husband, and that's when, in my opinion, life took a step back for her. But up until that point, man, she had a pretty good existence. And I am not at all hating on her for that. But I also understand why Alicent, in her position in life, would totally be in the peanut gallery giving some side eyes.
Jackie, I'm jealous of you.
I think Rondo and the powers that be, however, have lost the plot with Alicent's character. My annoyance that her and Kristen Cole were fucking in Rhaenyra's bedroom hit an all-time high because I just don't understand why you had to. Like, that is a fanfic thing that I saw that the show just decided to incorporate in why you should not like these two characters. Oh, because they're obsessed with Rhaenyra. They're even fucking in her bed. Tell me why. I didn't even catch they were in her bedroom until Pete pointed it out to me. And I really did throw up at that moment because I don't look at it as something that is wholly within the characterization that I've been following. And some would say, well, you just ain't giving into that. No. I'm pretty objective with this show. If there's something I need to say about either character, I'm going to say it. I don't feel as if this is anything but a way to disservice Alicent in favor of Rhaenyra. Alicent and Rhaenyra are, did I already say, I felt like I've already said it enough about how I feel these two characters are really reflections of each other in different stages in their lives and so on and so forth, because Rhaenyra is going to figure out what duty means, and she is not going to understand that. Alicent finally following something that she wants to do in this life is an inner turmoil about it, despite continuing on with those actions, because she finds herself caught up in emotions and feelings that she has never encountered before. And they're so heady that the idea that she's sinning is coupled with this intense guilt that she is herself, her actions causing all of the bad things that are happening, which is insane to me, but it also rings true that this would be something that's going to mentally deteriorate her. Adding the extra layer of, oh, I just want Riri because I can't get over her, that's just fanfic writing to me. And unnecessary when you have so much more of the generational trauma being unfolded out in that story arc with the Greens, that this little connection to Riri is, like I said before, I feel like it's a disservice. It's simply unnecessarily and put in there just to highlight it within the story that really doesn't mean or want anything, because all her actions are not to, like, that diminishes her character by honing everything down on, I just want to be obsessed with Rhaenyra. Kristen Cole, sure. That would be, but I don't even think that rings true for him, because why would he be so gung-ho to order her death at the end of the episode if he's just simply still spiraling in the feelings of this one person? Like, they're putting too much of their own personalities on Rhaenyra's character, and I just feel as if that's a miss. And it's a miss for only to derogatory? No, that's not a word I can use. Demean both of their characters. And I heard that Kristen Cole, the actor, jumped off of Twitter because people are attacking him because a lot of people don't understand, which is what I pointed out the first season or first episode, did I not? How this was not conducive because people don't separate reality from fantasy. So the fact that he himself is being attacked for his character highlights and proves my point. That people are not emotionally mature enough to be reviewing some of the themes in this show without personally becoming caught up in whatever trauma, what they feel is right and wrong, so on and so forth. So I was very disappointed at that because I thought a lot of the episode was really good with Alicent. Her continued failure to be able to affectionately interact with her children and be there for them in ways that, in a lot of ways, no one was there for her. That continued cycle she finds herself in and unable, like, all of that is really good and fascinating, and how it trickles down from Aegon to Otto. I did see on Tumblr a GIF showing that they all have the same fidgeting issue. So there is just so much there, because then Aegon's not able to comfort his wife, which is his sister, because these are things that continually are never given to them. So what we are seeing is just a cycle within the Greens, but it's a familial one. And the fact that it's familial makes it even more tragic how those bonds that should be the easiest bonds in the world are all fraught. The funniest and creepiest bit of this episode was Alicent trying to confess to her father that I have sinned, and his response is, "We shall not speak of it."
Bitch, you a little like I care. No.
This disconnection of family ties plays out with Aemon, plays out with Helaena, plays out with Aegon. It all tracks organically that Aemon would, in his own guilt, confess, "Oh, I feel bad for Luke. I didn't want that to happen. I shouldn't have lost my temper that day." I think that's a saving grace to differentiate him from, say, Daemon, who, upon realizing that a little boy had his head chopped off, was sitting in his seat with absolutely no regrets.
I did it my way.
They definitely were going with Aegon or Aemon exactly the way I thought they were going with Aemon. That he has some mommy issues. They all have mommy issues. However, we saw in the past that Aemon always went to his mother and was his champion and cheerleader. And I keep going back to that scene where he lost his eye and he's the one that goes up to her and puts his head on her shoulder like, "It's okay, Mom." And he's so happy that she took such visceral reaction in his defense, there is, I think, a certain sexual, emotional, Freudian, we'll get more into that in the feedback episode, thing going on with Aemon, which explains why he is in bed with a much older woman and has been for quite some time, it would seem, and that he would be completely vulnerable, even taking off his eye patch and then crawling up in a fetal position, is that he truly wants to have these types of transactions or interactions with his own mother, but because of her distance and how she's focused always more on duty first, he's not able or hasn't been able to facilitate that bond the way he expects and wants and desires. Whereas Aegon is far more upset about the rejection of his father than it feels he is in the rejection of his mother. He's found other outlets to indulge in that type of rage, which may go into why he is molesting women. That's just a thought, not concrete. But his father actually wanting him to be king was something he was holding on to. So when Otto shut that shit down real quick, like, oh, is that what you think?
I made this for you!
Maybe if you had a business that you were passionate about, then you would know what it takes to run a business, but you don't. So don't even act like you know what I'm talking about.
That really hurt him. And it also illustrates that no one believed that Viserys on his deathbed made the confession to have him in power, but it also illustrates that it never mattered. It never mattered. It was all about what Otto Hightower wanted and did. And yeah, I was both excited that he got the boot, but also sad because I know that he realized in that moment,
Our universe is doomed! Doomed!
he can't blame anybody but himself, though. He continued to do everything he could to try to keep Daemon out of inheriting the throne, which is the reason why he put forth the idea of Rhaenyra in the first place, because he thought his daughter was going to have a son, which he did, to eventually put him on the throne instead of her. Except all of his carefully laid plans. It's also a metaphor about how parents have these expectations and all these illusions in regards to who and what their children are going to be. And then they expect them to simply fall in line with that. Because as I brought up in the last episode, children are utilized as these tools for their parents to continue their own legacy versus being seen as people who require things of them so that they can live into the best people they can be, following whatever dreams they decide to follow. And this all backfired on him. So when he made Kristen Cole, out of all people, the hand of the king after he went off in that wrathful manner that he did, realizing everything he just built up, the goodwill of the people, was destroyed by his actions of choosing to kill a lot of people that weren't responsible for what happened to him, it was satisfying to see his face at the realization that it's all gonna go to shit. That he, in fact, orchestrated what is soon to be the destruction of the realm, undoing all the hard work that came before it with Viserys and Otto. He's so mad, he's like, fuck it, I'm going back to Hightown, or Old Town. I said Hightown. Back to Old Town. I don't even want to be a part of this shit anymore. And it's his daughter who has to tell him, no, you still have worth here. I forgot where she sent him. But she tells him, look, eventually I can bring you back into the fold. But for right now, you're going to have to cool your heels somewhere else and do something that's going to help. Because they're the only two in the Greens that are trying to avoid the worst possible outcome. We got a brief look at Lord Larys this episode, who continues to be a voice in the background in the shadows. Keep an eye on him, because he's keeping an eye on everything that's unfolding. Aegon, how are you going to be up in Kristen Cole's face? Like, what were you doing when you were supposed to be watching or making sure my son was being taken care of? He sat in bed, and that was enough to get him the hand of the king. I can't think of a worse hand of the king. The blind leading the blind. It's not surprising, though, because everyone that could and should be in power are always the ones that are never in power. The 1,100 people are definitely all making their way out of the small council of Aegon's, with Aemon being the only one who possibly has any actual, because he wants to fight, though. That's the thing. He has a hate for the blacks the way that Daemon has a hatred for the Greens, even though I don't know why he got beef with all of them. I'm genuinely confused about why you hate all of the Greens. Alicent ain't never done nothing to you other than marry your brother and have to suffer his bedside manner. Having it against Otto, understandable. Y'all two been fighting this battle for a very long time. But to hear that he desperately wants to kill all of the Greens due to his great hatred, that's the main reason he's supporting Rhaenyra, that feels almost like a stretch, as much as the obsession with Rhaenyra from the other side. Why can't you just let Daemon be who he is, which is a man in a midlife crisis? A man who's always sought glory, who found glory, who had everything going for him, and the last 15 years at Dragonstone, in his own words, because also listen to Pete, told me this, he's just a fat, ineffective person watching his best days go by with nothing to show for it, which leads to the scene where Riri finally takes charge and realizes that Daemon is not the one. Her response to, why would I go after Helaena of all people as a mother to inflict that type of pain on another mother? That feels absolutely asinine to me. And then everyone, well, the first one was Rhaenys, looked right at Daemon.
That motherfucker guilty.
Once she realized her husband has made her complicit in child murder, she lays into him as pathetic, that she doesn't trust him anymore. He gets upset because that's all he can ever do when someone makes points about his bad behavior, because he's like, oh, I didn't mean it. Your face didn't say you didn't mean it. You look like you got caught out there and you're mad that your worst actions were seen by the one you wanted to see you as a hero, and now she no longer sees you as a hero, and you are benched, except you can't bench your best player. And he decides, well, I wanted glory anyway, so I'm going to go out and take Harrenhal on his dragon. And yeah, that's gonna definitely win favors back into Rhaenyra's good graces, because Rhaenyra, for all that I did appreciate her taking action, telling Baela to look and spy on King's Landing, she's looking in the books of her history to try to get some wisdom and knowledge from the past. It does feel as if she's taking these actions on the back end of a council that she doesn't fully even control. Because that one guy saying to her, maybe you ordered it in your emotional grief.
Keep talking shit, you'll get a free ride in the ambulance.
He basically said because you were emotionally unstable, you were making irrational decisions. And if I had someone who would even think that thought on my council, knowing it's absolute bullshit, and the only way they're saying it to me is because I'm a woman, that is a precursor, in my opinion, to the uphill battle that Rhaenyra is going to be dealing with. And if Daemon takes Harrenhal, he becomes once again the authority in the Blacks. And that is going to eventually become a problem with who they are listening and taking their orders from, because Daemon is not going to stop, because he genuinely feels as if that throne should have been his. And the only reason you were chosen is because my brother had problems with me. And while, yeah, I'll still support you, it's not because I genuinely think you should have the throne.
I'm disrespectful as the fuck.
On the flip side, the scene where she was with her children and you could just tell she was thinking about Helena in that moment and how she would feel if one of these little boys had their head chopped off. It's that I love to keep seeing as the true tether between these women, is their experiences and the empathy and sympathy they can feel despite being on different sides of a, whatever you want to say, moralistic argument, what they think is right, so on and so forth. Which leads to the Eric versus Eric brother battle, the Brothers Grimm, about how these familial divides don't leave any winners in their wake, just devastation. Mysaria is released by Riri when Daemon leaves and doesn't live up to his promises, which shocker. I'm glad that the beginning of the formulation of their relationship comes from mutual respect. She wonders I'm glad we saw the collar around Mysaria's neck to highlight that she was a slave and she continues to be utilized by people. I think that's a very intriguing storyline to play with. Juxtaposed against Riri, who's rather had a lot of freedom in her life. And I don't think she fully appreciates the level of freedom and security that she was given. But I do like that because of her own sense of rightness of letting Mysaria go, that Mysaria, through her own conscience, saw that the brother clearly was at the castle, can't possibly be on the beach, that there was something afoot. Because Kristen Cole, once he felt guilty, decided to charge Eric with going to kill Rhaenyra by pretending to be his brother. Even though before Eric dead, he was throwing out a lot of truths to Kristen Cole, because he's talking about how your cloak is this, that, and the other thing. That is hypocritical talk. When your cloak just got put on less than 24 hours ago, being the queen's whore, which you swore you were never going to be, but you in there in her bedroom, she ain't even seeking your ass out. Aegon thought the plan might be brilliant. However, they know that it was Daemon. Well, I guess guilty by association. But it fails. Because brother against brother, I didn't like how the scene at first unfolded, I'll be honest. When he came in the room, brother! Like, why do I need to say that? But then the fight was very well done. And I did get emotional with the fight because you can tell that they both did not want to be fighting each other. And they're kind of talking like, why did you have to choose your side? Why did you have to choose your side? And despite the pain, it was about winning. And he ended up winning, but upon killing his brother, his twin, in the world, he could not live with himself, falling on his sword and committing suicide.
I will remember you.
I thought this was a perfect demonstration of the futility of the conflict, about how underneath it all is tragedy. Underneath it all is blood versus blood, ultimately, between these two families. And everyone is going to suffer. And at the end, no one's going to be doing anything but shedding tears for the loss. And having Rhaenyra be an audience to that, I hope, is something that they bring back in later seasons. Some odds and subs before we wrap up. What is up with that ship being named Daemon after his deceased brother of Lord Corlys that Daemon killed? I thought it was odd that they would be honoring him, even though he was supposedly because he's the one that spoke up and told Viserys the truth. Like, these kids are bastards. But clearly, Corlys definitely feels as if his brother should still be given his due in death. Speaking of, we met his two bastard sons. One that was looking at sea smoke. And it looks like they're not going to expound too much on what happened to Rhaenyra, which is one of the biggest parts in the book. I think is stupid. I think it's stupid that they try, and you can tell when they're trying in this show to circumnavigate some of the moral decisions within both sides, and not killing Rhaenyra was one of them. I still think it was one of the dumbest decisions of the show. I don't care about what the background's trying to say. Pandering to me, just do your story. It never works. But sea smoke is around, which means Rhaenyra is dead. And why am I forgetting their names? Because one was in one of my favorite shows that got canceled, Raised by Wolves. It took me a minute to recognize him as father because he packed on a lot more weight. But I can't remember his name and I can't remember the other one's name, and that's sad. I think one's Adam. And the other one, it'll come to me next time I'll write it down. Or tell me in the feedback. How about that? But yeah, we get our introduction to him, how he owes us. That was pretty much saying, the bastards. Two heartbreaking scenes. The one where Helena is looking at Ageon for some type of comfort, and he just looks at her and walks away because he doesn't know what to say or do. And she kind of nods her head. I thought that was really good. I was giving a lot of shit to Helena and how they were portraying her the first episode. I'm not taking into account her dreamer state, which is fair. But I don't know really, maybe because I'm just not fully sold on what they're doing with that characterization, that as a mother, I was only leaning to the emotional side. And they did in a few gifs show it was in her eyes, the horror of the situation. But this, they gave her a lot more of her inner turmoil and distress, and how she just accepted that this is my life, that there is no hugs, kisses. I'm not going to get the thing that I keep expecting to happen from the people around me. And that is summed up in the scene where Aegon is alone. He's no longer angry. He's just grieving in his bedroom, crying his eyes out. And Alicent goes, sees his distress, and she ends up walking away. And I have two minds about it. on one hand, was she going in there to try to get him into the mental mindset about his actions, saw that he was grieving, and this was her way of, in her own mindset, of giving him a reprieve, of being merciful, so to speak. But on the other hand, that's your son. That's your baby. He is hurting. Even if you didn't want to continue on about the things that you feel are necessary, why not go and give him the mother's love that he so desperately wants and needs? I want to know more about what that feeling is in Alicent that she can't reconcile with her children. And I think she is much more, I think the most she gives is with Rhaenyra. But even with Rhaenyra, she's standing in the doorway. She's not hugging her baby the way you hug your baby when they're in distress, which makes me feel, other than what, is the obvious, oh, she's a bad mother, that there's very complicated emotions around, because when it comes down to it, she will do anything for her children. But when it comes to that other side of the equation, the very base side of that, it's as if she hits a brick wall. Like there's something within her that just cannot. And I wonder if it revolves around the inception of those children coming to play. That it wasn't something that was organically a desire to have or be a mother, on top of the act itself not being something that was wholly her desire. If that is what's keeping this brick wall between the love she feels for her children and the love she actually shows to her children, or is there another part of it where there is a disappointment in Aegon as a person? I mean, she was very angry when she found out what he did to she's protecting him, right? Because that's what a mother does. But inwardly, is there a deep-seated hatred or dislike of your own son? Like, you're weak, you're this, you're that, you're the other thing. And all of that culmination of, and how you caused this divide, or you were part of the divide between me and the only family I ever felt I had. Like, it's all a ball of, I think it's not as simplistic as just, oh, you're a bad mom, right? Juxtaposed against Rhaenyra, who is a very good mom, but all of her children she had out of love. Once again, if you want to send feedback, blackgirlcouch@gmail.com. I will be dropping the feedback episode tomorrow. You can send written feedback or audio feedback. My social media will be below. Like, share, subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, wherever good podcasts can be found. Go down to the rating section, drop some stars, leave me a review. I appreciate it. Until the next time, peace, hair grease, and black girl magic.